So we do have the major prison in the state, the branch prison as it's known down South Marquette. Very few escape attempts there because the people know where we go, you know, it's like this impenetrable barrier of woods surrounding them. And so these poor German prisoners, so a group of them got off to the Seney Stretch and got picked up, and then there was another small group, 2 or 3, that made it from probably Autrain and got down to Scandia and were picked up by the state police and brought back. So you had that kind of activity. There was another interesting development that was centered in the UP, and that was a conscientious objector camp. There were 3 conscientious objector camps. So what happened there was prior to the war, there were various peace religions, Quakers, Mennonites, and others who wanted, and I guess they did it in World War I, and they wanted to do it in World War II, that it was against the religious principles of these adherents to fight. Now, they would help out. They would work in a mental hospital. They would work in a regular hospital. They would clean dishes. They would do any kind of work, but they would not fight. It was against their religion. So the government gave them a special classification. 99% of the people adhered to the regulations and worked and so on. There was a little group that felt that the government had no right even demanding them to work and to do any kind of work. And they caused a lot of trouble, in some cases by doing nothing. And eventually there were 3 camps created for the troublemakers. One was in Oregon, around Bend, Oregon, one was in Colorado, and one was in Seney. And the one at Seney, the workers there, you know, what were they going to do at Seney? They were going to develop the wildlife preserve, you know, building dikes and dams and so on for the water, maintaining the roadway, and you know, just peacetime activities. And what's kind of interesting about it was the local population in places like Manistee, Newberry, you know, that were around the Seney area, very interestingly had more regard for the German prisoners of war, who would sometimes be brought into town to go to a movie or something, but they had more regard for them than the conscientious objectors, because they could say, these guys, well, they got caught, you know, they lost the battle, they got caught, but they were fighting. You know, and they weren't going to discuss what they're fighting for, but they were fighting. They were soldiers. They were fighting. And now we have these guys, these conscientious objectors, that are kind of doing nothing. You know, they're on the dole here. And then at one point, there was a kind of a nasty event that took place. The conscientious objectors. Well, they were always complaining that they shouldn't be there and so on. And so one time they went into the kitchen and threw over big jars of mayonnaise and mustard and so on and so on. And this came out. It actually appears in Time magazine sometime, I think, in 1944, it was kind of presented as a fifth column rebellion taking place in the middle of the United States against the U.S. war effort. So the whole thing the media took it even then and blew it up, and it was this major riot an upheaval, not so much riot, but a big upheaval that took place. They brought in the state police. They brought in the FBI. They brought in the Army intelligence, and on and on and on. It made Time magazine, and all it was just some of these disgruntled guys that decided to go in and raid the kitchen and smash everything up. And but there was a great deal of hostility of local people to all of that. It was interesting when it was over. The poor guy who was in charge, and there were kind of no rules governing him, It took him about a year to write up the final report. He was just so disgusted with what had happened. He couldn't, for instance, they would send the guys out and say, okay, now we want you to rake this area up, clean all this debris and whatnot. And the guys would stand there and say, oh, how do you do that? Well, then they'd have to show them. Here's how you use a rake and a shovel and an axe. Oh, how do you do that again? And the guy went and figured, the guy in charge figured that it would have saved the government an incredible amount of money if they had just ignored these people and not spent any money to house them and take care of them. It was a tremendous, and I forget, he ran the figures for the period of time that the camp was open, and it was a tremendous, tremendous waste of money. And I don't know, he had problems. I don't know if they continued after he was done, but he was disgusted with the whole process. Now, so the war effort then goes through 1945. The war comes to an end. There is, absolute jubilation throughout the state, throughout the country, throughout the world over the end of the war. And then you're going to come into the post-war period. And at that point, you might say Michigan had gone through various boom times over the years. You know, we had like the 19th century, the development of the mining industry, the development of the timber industry, the development of commercial fishing, the development of, for instance, the furniture industry in Grand Rapids, the various industries, railroad, car construction, stove making, various heavy industries around the Detroit area, and the state boomed in the late 19th century. Things then will continue to boom with the automobile industry from, say, 1900 to 1930. Michigan booms. I'll talk a little later about the development of Detroit. Then you had the Great Depression that came in, and things kind of collapsed. After that, you have World War II. Boom times in the state, but people, as I pointed out earlier, people could not spend the money that they were making. Like my mother-in-law was, her husband was in the Army Air Force, stationed in the South Pacific. So he's fighting. She gets a job at one of the manufacturing companies and is working, round the clock, 12-hour days, and is being well paid, but can't spend the money. All the people could do is buy savings bonds. So they're saving and saving and saving, year in, year out. Not an exciting life. They can't go too far, 10 miles, you can drive 10 miles a week, a month, or you had a ration of, not 10 miles, but 10 gallons of gas. So you're going to find there's a tremendous amount of money that people are putting together. And so when the war ends, it's not, well, it's the end of the war. There's going to be, as usually happens at the end of a war, there's an economic conversion as you go from the booming wartime economy, and then the economy has to reshift itself to become a civilian economy. So you have to go from Chrysler has to go from making tanks to now coming out with automobiles, and you have that development. So usually at the end of a war, there's a bit of time there where there's the conversion process is taking place. That happens, and then you have the boom times of the 1950s. And so you have this money that has been saved. Now you have You have the soldiers and sailors and airmen and so on coming back from the war. They've been paid as well, not as you would in an industry. The wives have been working. Money has been saved. Now they want to develop families. Some of them had been married before they went into the war. Some of them marry when they come out, come back home, and so on. And so you're going to have the development of suburbia. And a lot of times if you're, I can't think of any one, but if you ever travel around a suburban area in Michigan or wherever you're at, you'll find little homes, not the big fancy homes that you'll have later on in the 1950s, but you'll find these little homes kind of on 25-foot lots. What do they call them? Levittown homes, I think. But it was a house for small family, okay? And they'll pop up all over the place. For instance, here on campus, they had, and then you're going to have like the GI Bill is going to allow veterans to go to school with government money and so on. And so we had all of a sudden Northern's campus and campuses around the state. All of a sudden you had hundreds of students coming to campus. During the war, I think Northern's enrollment went down to about 300 women. And the idea there was to continue, within a certain range, life and producing teachers that would go out and teach and so on. You didn't want to, shut schools down or shut anything down. Like I mentioned, the Gerber's company, they wanted to continue producing food for babies and so on. But after the war, all of a sudden you go from 300 to 400, 500, 600. I think in that period from about 1946 to the early 50s, you had enrollment got into the, 700, 600, 700 people, men, mostly men on campus. Some very interesting developments there. There was a no smoking policy on campus. And if you wanted to smoke, you didn't go out 30 feet from the building. You had to go out off the property. I think the hospital does that, and all of the people from the hospital then come to Northern's campus to smoke. They come across the street there. You'll see this group, and it'll be 20 below zero, and they're all standing out there, freezing cold, smoking away. What you had to do here on campus, you had to step in the gutter. You could not have a foot on the property if you were smoking. It would be off the property, okay? Well, now you're bringing in, 25, 26-year-olds who fought in the war, bullets flying, seen all these horrors, and now you're telling them, no, you can't smoke. You have to go stand out in the corner. Well, very quickly, that was one that they went and rearranged the prohibition. Another one was Northern would have had a long tradition of, and I think that you still do it today, of games on the Dead River. The junior class challenging the senior class. And there wasn't too much concern with liability, getting rather rough. In some cases, they would have the famous, they'd have this huge ball, maybe 20 feet in diameter or more, this huge ball that they would then push up and down a field. And part of it was usually juniors and seniors would do it, and the idea was you had rope in your pocket, and you would then take out the opposition. So if there's a junior there, a bunch of the seniors would grab them, hog tie them, and throw them to the side. As I said, there's no concern for liability. You wouldn't do that today. Or you'd kidnap people and take them off and then put them out in a barn someplace. One guy told a story where they went and his buddies, they were from Ishpeming, and his buddies were coming down one day, and they said, George, we're going to take a little detour here, and they went and they took him and they put him on an island in a little lake. And he eventually, I have an interview with him, he tells the whole story, how he bundles his clothes up and made a little raft, and then swam to shore and came back, and all of his buddies were excited that he had survived the kidnap attempt and so on. So you had all of this activity. Now it continued. It went back into, they started doing this again. The only problem is that you now have these, 20-year-olds being attacked by 25, 26-year-old military guys. And that, I think they did it once, and that was the end of the physical challenge. So I think you have, don't they have games on the Dead River? They had it in the fall. Okay, so they kind of still have it, but I haven't seen it, but I think it's under control.
It's just like an obstacle course, and then there's an ice cream drop where you stand on a ladder and someone scoops ice cream into your mouth when you're laying on the beach. Okay. And then there's a sandcastle building competition.
Okay. You see how it's degenerated? In the old days, it was physical violence was involved there. So you're going to have that type of development. Now, one of the things that they did, they brought in, and some of you might have seen, there's a plaque over by the University Center, the barracks boys and so on. There were these buildings that were they call them Quonset huts, kind of barracks buildings and so on. Well, this was Army surplus, and this happened to schools all around the state. They brought in the Army surplus to have ready-made dorms, and so the Army was getting rid of, they didn't need this stuff, so they pretty much gave it to schools, and then they built these dwellings, and we have pictures of them in the archives, but there'd be the mother and father and maybe 2 small children living in a dorm room. Okay, and so one part of the dorm room was the living room, and one part over here is the kitchen, and oh yeah, that's the kids' bedroom there. And what they would do, they would put the kids in drawers. They would sleep in drawers. So they opened the drawer and put the kid in the drawer.